3 hours after my husband locked me outside in the freezing dark, the phone rang in his kitchen. It was not me calling to beg, it was a detective. She told Ellis that his wife was lying in a hospital bed with stitches in her head, an irregular heartbeat, and hypothermia from being left in the snow. She told him a gray SUV had been seen near the place where I fell. Ellis came to that hospital expecting to find a liar who had finally been caught. Instead, he walked into a room full of documents, police officers, bank records, and the truth he had refused to see. But before the hospital, before the detective, before the evidence bag with his father's watch inside it, there was a locked door. There was a porch light going dark, and there was a man I had loved for 18 years choosing his son's lie over my life. My name is Aisha Monroe. I was 50 years old on the last night of January, standing on my own front porch in a thin wool sweater while snow blew sideways under the porch roof. My husband stood inside the storm door with one hand on the deadbolt. His son, Cameron, stood behind him with his arms folded and the calm face of a man who had already won. "Go, Aisha," Ellis said. He did not even open the door all the way. "I do not want you back in this house until the money is returned." "You really believe I stole from you?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. He looked at Cameron, then back at me. "I believe my son." 5 words. 18 years, and it came down to 5 words. It was below freezing. I had no coat, no boots, no phone, no wallet, no keys. My blood pressure medication was still on the kitchen counter where I had set it after dinner. Cameron had gathered my things earlier that evening and locked them in the bedroom, telling his father I was packing to run. "A woman who isn't planning to disappear does not keep her passport close," he had said. My passport was in my desk because I had renewed it the week before for a work conference in Toronto. Cameron knew that. He also knew Ellis would not ask me first. Ellis gave me 10 minutes to leave and would not let me back in for my phone. He said I would use it to delete evidence. I told him the bank was already investigating the account activity and that I was the one who had reported it. Cameron stepped forward. "Do not let her stall, Dad. She's been doing this for weeks." I looked at my husband's face through the glass and understood something that hit harder than the cold. He had already decided. He had not asked me one honest question. He had not given 18 years of marriage the weight of one phone call to the bank, one look at a date stamp, one moment alone with me away from his son's voice. He had heard enough to feel afraid. And fear had made him cruel. I stepped back from the porch before he could call the police and tell them I was the disturbance. The lock turned behind me with a sound I felt in my chest. Then the porch light went out. That was the part I remembered later when people asked what broke me, not the accusation, the light. I started walking toward the gas station about a mile away. It was the only place I knew would still be open. The wind cut through my sweater as if the fabric was not there. Snow packed into my flats within the first few minutes, and the cold moved from my feet into my bones with frightening speed. I kept my arms crossed tight over my chest and counted mailboxes. 1, 2, 3. Counting kept me from thinking about the kitchen table, about Cameron's folder, about Ellis's face when he said he believed his son. Somewhere past the 4th house, an engine revved behind me. Headlights swept across the road too fast for that quiet street. I turned because old habits from my investigation days still lived in my body. Get the vehicle, get the plate, get the detail no one thinks matters yet. My foot hit black ice. I went down hard. My temple struck the curb, and for a second the whole world flashed white. I remember lying there with snow hitting my face. I remember the red glow of taillights. I remember a gray SUV idling near the corner, then pulling away. There was a dent along the rear panel. I knew that dent. It looked like Cameron's car. Then everything tilted, and the dark came in pieces. The next voice I heard was a woman's, sharp and scared, yelling for someone to call 911. Before I go further, tell me where you're listening from tonight. City, state, country, whatever you want to share. It helps me remember these stories travel farther than the rooms where they started. To understand how I ended up on that road, you have to go back 6 weeks. Cameron showed up at our house with 2 suitcases and a story about a tech company that had laid off half its staff. He said his girlfriend had left. He said he just needed a few months to get back on his feet. He was 32 then, still handsome in the polished way that made strangers trust him too fast. He was Ellis's only child from his first marriage, and Ellis had carried guilt over that boy like a second spine. He had missed school events during the divorce. He had worked late at the dealership. He had always believed Cameron's resentment was something he owed payment on forever. When Ellis asked if Cameron could stay, I said yes. Not because Cameron and I were close. We were not. I had been in his life since he was 14, old enough to resist me and young enough to need me anyway. I drove him to practices. I sat with him in the emergency room when he broke his leg at 16. I covered a semester of college tuition when Ellis's dealership had a bad year, and Cameron was too proud to admit he might have to drop out. I even sold my mother's bracelet once, quietly, so the dealership could make payroll during the recession. I did not do those things to buy love. But I will not pretend I did not hope they would count for something. For the first week, Cameron played the part well. He helped with dishes. He called me Aisha instead of your wife when talking to Ellis. He thanked me for fresh towels. He told his father he was applying for jobs. By the second week, I started noticing. Cameron took phone calls in the backyard, pacing near the fence, lowering his voice whenever I passed a window. He asked too casually what the house might be worth if we ever sold it. He brought up the deed more than once. "Dad should be protected," he said one night while Ellis was watching television. "I mean, if something happened to you, does he even have rights here?" "Your father is protected," I said. "That's vague. It is also none of your business." He smiled at that, not angry, interested. I had spent 11 years investigating insurance fraud before I became a risk consultant. I knew that look. It is the look people get when they learn where a door might be locked. Then the small things became less small. A bank alert showed a login from an unfamiliar device. A request appeared to transfer $85,000 from a dealership-linked account into an LLC I had never heard of. A photocopy of Ellis's signature sat in the printer tray, practiced again and again on the same sheet like a child learning cursive. I found a voice editing app open on Cameron's laptop one afternoon when he left it on the kitchen table. I saw payments going out to a sports betting site through an account tied to the dealership. I did not confront him. Confronting a liar too early only teaches him where the camera is. I reported the irregular transfer request to the bank's fraud division. I took photographs of the device history. I called Detective Nadine Porter, a woman I had worked beside years earlier on an insurance fraud case, and asked what I should document if I wanted the truth to hold up later. Nadine did not dramatize anything. "Keep copies outside the house," she said. "Do not accuse him until the bank locks the account activity. And Aisha, do not underestimate a desperate person with debt." I also called Lisa Carter, my attorney of nearly 20 years. Lisa had drawn up our marital property agreement when Ellis and I married. She knew the house, the dealership, the old debts, the guarantees, and the parts of my life I had protected, because she had been the one reminding me protection was not the same as mistrust. "Quiet," Lisa told me. "Everything quiet until we know what he touched." That was my mistake. I was quiet. Cameron noticed anyway. Once he understood I was watching him, he did not run. He built a story faster than I could finish building mine. He created a fake email made to look like it came from me to a real estate broker, asking about a quick sale of the house. He printed a draft sale contract with my name typed at the bottom. He took a screenshot of the $85,000 transfer request and cropped it so it looked completed, not frozen in the bank's verification queue. He took Ellis's father's watch from the box in my dresser. That watch mattered. Ellis's father had worn it for 30 years, and after he died, Ellis kept it like a small piece of the man still had weight in the room. I had sent it out for repair 3 weeks earlier. The receipt was in my office drawer. Cameron picked it up from the jeweler by pretending to act for Ellis, then left the empty box where his father would find it. The worst piece was the recording. I had spoken with Lisa about a medical power of attorney after Ellis had a dizzy spell that sent him to urgent care the previous spring. What I actually said was, If Ellis becomes unable to make decisions because of a stroke or serious illness, we need a clear medical power of attorney, but only one that protects his choices for as long as possible. Cameron cut that call down to 11 words. Ellis will no longer have the right to decide. We need power of attorney. Stripped of every honest word around it, I sounded like a woman planning to take control of my husband's life. Cameron did not bring all of this to Ellis at once. That would have been too obvious. He fed it to him in pieces. One worried comment at breakfast, one printed page left on the counter, one sad conversation in the garage where he said he did not want to break up our marriage, but he could not stay silent if his father was being used. He knew exactly which scar to press. Ellis's first wife had drained a joint account and left with another man years before I met him. Ellis had never gotten over the shame of not seeing it coming. Cameron used that old wound like a handle. "You missed the signs last time," he told his father. "I do not want that happening again." By the night everything broke, Cameron had a folder. He laid it on the kitchen table like a prosecutor. I remember the folder was blue. I remember my coffee going cold near my elbow. I remember Ellis standing with one hand on the back of a chair, not sitting down, because sitting might have made it a conversation instead of a verdict. "Tell me the truth," Ellis said. "I have been trying to," I answered. Cameron opened the folder. He showed the cropped transfer, the fake broker email, the draft sale contract, the empty watch case, the edited recording. I asked to see the full pages. Ellis said, "You can explain from where you are." So I tried. I told him I had reported the transfer myself. Cameron cut in. "Of course she says that. The person who gets caught always claims she found it first." I told Ellis the house could not be sold without my real signature. Cameron leaned forward. "Hear that, Dad? She just said the house is hers." That was when Ellis learned in front of his son that his name had never been on the deed. His face changed. Not because I had hidden it. I had bought the house in 2002, before we ever met. Ellis moved in 2007. We married in 2008. Lisa had drawn up an agreement early in our marriage because Ellis was still carrying obligations from his first divorce, and we both needed clean lines around the house and dealership. None of that was secret. But Ellis had let the years turn facts into assumptions, and Cameron knew shame would do what logic could not. "So I live here 18 years, Ellis said, "and it was never mine." "It was our home," I said. "That is not what I asked." I looked at Cameron then. For half a second before Ellis turned toward him for confirmation, I saw fear in Cameron's eyes. Not guilt, fear. He did not only want me accused, he needed me away from my phone and computer before I could stop whatever came next. That was when Ellis told me to leave. Marlene Franklin was the woman who found me. She was 62, a retired nurse, driving home from her sister's house when her headlights caught something dark against the snow near the curb. She told me later she almost drove past, then she saw my hand move. Marlene pulled over, called 911, and wrapped me in the emergency blanket she still kept in her trunk from decades of habit. She talked to me the whole time, even though I could not answer. "Stay with me, honey," she kept saying. "Help is coming." She also saw the gray SUV leaving the area. Most people would have been too shaken to notice anything else. Marlene wrote part of the plate number on her palm with a pen from her glove compartment because she did not trust memory in bad weather. At St. Catherine Medical Center, Dr. Stephen Ross diagnosed mild to moderate hypothermia, a mild concussion, a cut at my temple that needed stitches, and an irregular heartbeat brought on by cold and stress. I came up through the fog slowly, with monitor beeps in my ears and a nurse asking if I knew my name. I knew my name. What I did not know was whether my husband had wondered where I was. Then, right, the hospital, there was, the power, Ella, Cameron taking his credit card without asking, lying about finishing his degree, borrowing money from his aunt and denying it. The accident Ellis paid to settle so Cameron would not face charges. "You did not protect your son," I said. "You taught him that every consequence had a price you would pay." That hurt him more than the forged policy. I saw it. I did not soften it. That night, I made decisions from a hospital bed with stitches still fresh in my scalp. Ellis would not return to the house while the investigation was active. He could collect personal items only with an officer present. Cameron was barred from the property. Lisa would begin revoking my guarantee on dealership debts touched by the fraud. I would not decide the marriage under fluorescent lights while my heart monitor was still attached to me. Ellis asked me not to end it. "You ended my sense of safety when you locked that door," I told him. It was already heavy enough. I stayed in the hospital for 2 days. When I was released, I moved slowly and slept badly. Cold had a way of staying in me even after my skin warmed. I kept waking up reaching for a phone that was already on the nightstand. On the second morning, Nadine came by with something she had not wanted to show me while my blood pressure was still jumping every time someone said Ellis's name. It was doorbell footage from the McKennas across the street. I had not known their camera caught our porch at an angle. It showed me standing outside in my sweater, one hand lifted toward the door, the other wrapped around my ribs. It showed Ellis behind the glass for 3 seconds. It showed Cameron behind him, almost over his shoulder, watching with the stillness of a person waiting to see if a plan would hold. Then the porch light went dark. That part hurt more than I expected. The lock had been anger, the words had been fear. But the porch light going dark was a decision made after the first decision. It was not shouted, it was not confused, it was a quiet little action from a man who wanted the dark to make me disappear. Nadine asked if I wanted her to stop the video. "No," I said. "Let it play." It showed me waiting another minute. It showed me turning toward the driveway, then stopping because I was dizzy, then steadying myself against the porch rail. It showed my breath in the air. It showed me walking down the steps carefully because there was already ice on the edge of the bottom one. When the clip ended, I asked Nadine to show it to Ellis. Not because I wanted to punish him with it. Punishment had already done enough in that house. I wanted him to understand the exact size of what he had done before he started using words like mistake, fear, confusion, and manipulation. Those words were not useless. Cameron had manipulated him. Fear had confused him. But none of that turned off the porch light. Later, Lisa told me Ellis watched the video in a small interview room with his hands folded so tightly, his knuckles blanched. When the porch went dark, he closed his eyes. "I did that," he said. "Yes," Lisa told him. "You did." He said he had turned it off because seeing me out there made him feel guilty, and guilt made him angry. That sentence stayed with me for a long time because it was the most honest thing he said during those first days. He had not turned off the light because he thought I was dangerous. He had turned it off because my suffering interrupted the story he needed to believe. The day I left the hospital, an officer drove me home to collect my phone, wallet, medication, coat, and a few clothes. Ellis was not allowed inside while I was there. The house looked ordinary, which felt offensive. The mail still sat in the tray by the door. My mug was still in the sink. A pair of Ellis's work gloves rested on the radiator. There was a half-finished grocery list on the counter with eggs, spinach, and coffee written in my handwriting, as if the worst night of my life had simply stepped around the daily evidence that I belonged there. My purse was on the floor beside the hall table, where it had fallen when Ellis grabbed my arm and turned me toward the door. I picked it up and checked the medication first. Then I went to my office. Cameron had gone through the desk drawers, but he had not known about the external drive taped beneath the bottom drawer. That was an old habit from fraud work. I used to tell clients that people who forge documents usually look for what feels official. They check file cabinets, lockboxes, laptops, and email folders. They rarely look under cheap furniture. On that drive was the backup receipt for the watch repair, the scanned copy of the marital property agreement, my original notes on the bank login, and a recording of my call with fraud protection made before Cameron edited anything. I stood in the office with the drive in my hand and started laughing. It was not joy, it was exhaustion leaving through the wrong door. The officer looked worried until I explained. "This," I said, holding up that plain black drive, "is why women keep records." Ellis and I attended Cameron's initial hearing several days later, seated rows apart. Cameron looked smaller in court. Without the calm posture and clean sweater, without his folder and his father's fear, he looked like a frightened man who had mistaken desperation for intelligence. He spoke to Ellis first. "I did it to protect you from her." Ellis's voice came out flat. "By letting her freeze in the snow?" Cameron denied that part. He said he followed me only to make sure I left the neighborhood. He said he panicked when I fell. He said he thought somebody else would find me. Nadine had already shown us the video of his SUV slowing near my body before driving away. There are lies that collapse under questions. That one collapsed under silence. Then Cameron looked at me. "That house was supposed to belong to this family. I was your family for 18 years, I said. "You only remembered that word when you wanted something from it." In the hallway afterward, Cameron begged Ellis to cover bail. It was the old pattern making one last reach. For the first time since I had known him, Ellis said no. "You need to face what you did." Cameron's face changed. "She's taking you from me." Ellis looked at him for a long time. "No," he said. "You showed me what I helped create." It was not redemption, but it was the first honest sentence I had heard from my husband in a long while. The next weeks were a blur of legal appointments, bank calls, police updates, and repair estimates from the garage. Lisa untangled the financial wreckage with the patience of a surgeon. Cameron had no claim to the house. That was formally confirmed. His name was removed as beneficiary from every account and policy tied to Ellis. I was not responsible for the debts he had created through forged dealership documents. The dealership had to be restructured, but Lisa had blocked the worst damage before it spread. My house stayed mine. My accounts stayed mine. My name stayed clear. The marriage was harder. Ellis wanted to come home. He wanted counseling. He wanted a chance to repair what he called the worst mistake of his life. I did not answer right away. For 3 weeks, he tried to explain himself in ways that were sometimes honest and sometimes just pain wearing a cleaner shirt. He told me he had been humiliated by the deed. He said hearing that the house was mine made him feel like a guest after all those years, even though he had known the agreement existed. He admitted he had not thought about it in a long time because thinking about it made him feel smaller than he wanted to feel. "Cameron made it sound like you were waiting to throw us both away," he said during one conversation in Lisa's conference room. "Cameron lied," I said, "but you chose the lock." He flinched. I did not apologize for that. There were softer truths, too. Ellis had loved his son. He had seen the best version of Cameron when Cameron was little, when he came home with scraped knees and science fair ribbons, and asked his father to look at every drawing like it belonged in a museum. Parents remember those versions. Sometimes they mistake memory for evidence. I understood that. Understanding did not hand him my house key. He had options that night. He could have called Lisa. He could have called Nadine. He could have gone to the bank with me the next morning. He could have slept in the guest room with the bedroom door locked if he truly feared me. He could have stood in the kitchen and asked one real question. Instead, he made my coat unreachable. Instead, he took my phone out of my hand. Instead, he sent a 51-year-old woman with blood pressure medication in her purse into freezing weather because a son with gambling debts had arranged a folder neatly enough. That was the part no counseling session could polish. Ellis started therapy before I asked him to. He also joined a group for parents of adult children with addiction and financial chaos. I was glad he did. It made him less defensive. It gave him language that did not ask me to comfort him. But healing is not a refund. It does not give back the minutes on that porch. Instead, a week after I came home, I handed him an envelope on the front porch. Inside was a legal separation agreement, a temporary division of belongings, a schedule for retrieving his things with an officer present, and information for a 6-month lease on a small apartment across town. I had paid the first month. He stared at the papers. "After what I did, you are still helping me." "I do not want you out in the cold," I said. "That is the difference between us." I did not say it to sound noble. I said it because it was true. Mercy is not weakness. It is a boundary with a human face. "Is there any chance for us?" he asked. "Not for the marriage we had." I would not say more. I had not decided whether anything could exist beyond that. I only knew the old marriage had ended when the lock turned behind me. 6 months passed before the last pieces settled. Cameron accepted a plea agreement rather than risk trial. He received a fixed prison term, financial probation, restitution, and mandatory gambling addiction treatment. The charge tied to leaving me in the snow remained part of the record, even though the state did not claim he had tried to kill me. That mattered to me. Not every ugly thing needs to be exaggerated to be unforgivable. Ellis sold his stake in the dealership to satisfy legitimate debts left in the wake of Cameron's scheme. He moved into a smaller apartment and began attending a support group for parents of adult children with addiction. I heard that from Lisa first, then from him. I was glad, in a quiet way, not glad enough to go back, just glad enough to know he had stopped pretending love meant paying every bill his son created. Our divorce was finalized in early summer. I made my own decision about the house soon after. I sold it. I know some people expected me to stay because it was mine, because keeping it would prove a point. But I did not want to spend the rest of my life waking up in the place where my husband had turned off the porch light while I stood outside in a blizzard. Ownership is not always the same as peace. With part of the proceeds, I bought a smaller house near Lake Erie. Nothing grand. 2 bedrooms, a little front porch, a kitchen with morning light, and a narrow path to the door that I could shovel myself if I wanted to. With another part, I started a legal aid fund for women over 45 facing financial abuse in their marriages. Women who find out late that love does not protect a deed. Women whose phones get taken. Women whose signatures get forged. Women who are told they are confused, bitter, domineering, or dramatic when they are the only ones keeping records. The first woman we helped was named Patricia. She was 57, with tired eyes, careful nails, and a grocery bag full of calendars, deposit slips, payroll stubs, and church bulletins where she had written mileage notes in the margins. Her husband owned a small construction company and had told the court she had never worked a day in the business. Patricia had answered phones for 22 years. She had scheduled crews, paid suppliers, chased invoices, handled lien releases, packed lunches for workers during storm repairs, and taken calls at midnight when somebody's basement flooded. She had no title, no salary for the first decade, no retirement account in her name, just a grocery bag full of proof nobody had expected her to keep. When she sat in my little office above the credit union, she kept apologizing for the papers being messy. Messy is fine, I told her. Missing is harder. We connected her with a forensic accountant and an attorney who understood family businesses. 2 months later, Patricia's contribution to that company was on record, not as a favor, not as a sob story, as documented labor. That was when I knew the fund would last, not because it was big. It was not big. Because women kept arriving with grocery bags, shoeboxes, flash drives, old calendars, bank envelopes, and the same look I had worn in the hospital when I realized the truth had survived me. I named the fund after my mother. She taught me that dignity does not have to be loud. It only has to be real. Near the end of that summer, Ellis came to the new house to return an old set of keys. They no longer opened anything of mine, but he said he did not want to throw them away. He stood on the porch and waited until I invited him inside. That waiting mattered. "I thought locking you out was protecting my family," he said. "Family does not need protection from the truth." He nodded. Then he apologized. Not the quick kind. Not the kind that asks to be rewarded. He apologized for believing Cameron without asking me, for letting his old fear from his first marriage judge me, for turning a snowstorm into punishment, for caring more about feeling betrayed than checking whether betrayal had actually happened. I accepted the apology. That does not mean I handed him a key. "Forgiveness does not come with a door code," I told him. He gave a small, sad smile. "I know." Then he left. That evening, snow began to fall again, light, slow, soft against the porch rail. I stood at the window and watched it settle on the new walkway. This time I had a warm coat hanging by the door. My phone was in my pocket, fully charged. My medication was in the bathroom cabinet where I could reach it. My keys were in my hand. Marlene came over for dinner that night with 2 friends from the legal aid board. She still would not let me call her a hero. "I did what anybody should do," she said, carrying a covered dish into my kitchen. Maybe that was true, but the world changes because some people still do what anybody should do. We ate at my small table while snow gathered outside. Laughter filled the house, not loud enough to shake the windows, just warm enough to make the rooms feel lived in. 6 months earlier, a door closed behind me on the coldest night of winter. I thought that lock was the sound of my life falling apart. I was wrong. It was the sound of a life that had been too small finally breaking open. Ellis believed his son's lies and put me out of my own home. It took police, bank records, camera footage, and a stack of forged documents to show him the truth. But the truth that mattered most was not in any folder. I do not need a man who believes me only after evidence is placed in front of him. I need peace that does not require a defense. Outside, the snow kept falling over the path to my door. I rested my hand on the frame and listened to my friends laughing behind me. Then I locked the door, not to keep the world out, to protect the quiet I had earned. This time, the key stayed in my hand. If you have ever had to prove the truth to people who should have trusted you, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And if this story reminded you that peace is worth protecting, like, share, and subscribe so you do not miss the next one.